Ancient biblical prophets wrote about the future. Today, theologians are poring over those scriptures with a firm belief that their prophecies are coming to pass. Journey now into the world of eschatology on Prophecy in the News with author and lecturer J.R. Church.
The beast that rises up out of the sea in Revelation chapter 13 is a leopard. As political darkness descends upon this world and the Antichrist rises to power with his world government, we actually have what I would consider to be the night of the leopard. Gary Stimmen is here to discuss with me the history of where this beast came from.
J.R., this is a most interesting story. It's a story that is a biblical archetype. It is a secular history, and it's all about a man, and I think probably everyone in the listening audience, the viewing audience today will recognize his name upon first hearing, and yet there's a great deal about him that needs to be spoken. His name is Nimrod, and J.R., the Bible mentions him and then is silent.
Yes, and it's interesting that the Bible doesn't have a lot to say about him, but he was the one who actually put together the dispensation of human government. Genesis chapter 10, verse 8 and following, and Cush begat Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. It's interesting that the term hunter is here used to describe all that there is to Nimrod.
Yeah. J.R., when you really think about Nimrod, basically he's viewed as a hero, and it's very possible to mistakenly view him as a hero of the faith, because as we read here in Genesis, he's a mighty hunter before the Lord. It almost sounds like he's doing something in behalf of the Lord. Actually, this is the exact opposite. What he's doing is rebelling against the Lord. J.R., his
Yes.
name, in fact, in the old Assyrian and Babylonian tongues, that is the Akkadian language, comes from a root that means let us rebel. And then it comes into the Hebrew as another word, Nimrud, which means subduer of the leopard, or he who operates in the power of the leopard.
And I would rather think that second definition there would be closer to the accurate one. Mm-hmm. He actually, according to history, according to what historical references we can find of Nimrod, he wore a leopard skin as a symbol of his power and political authority. So here we have, from the various earliest pages of the Bible, from the earliest fountainhead of history, the leopard skin and the power of the leopard invested in Nimrod and his administration. And we see its grand conclusion when the leopard rises again in Revelation chapter 13. So don't miss this tremendous connection. We have a lot to talk about on the program today. Let's discuss, Gary, why Nimrod established world government, why he built the Tower of Babel, and why he developed idolatry.
Well, J.R., it's a long story. First of all, there's the idea of Nimrod the hunter. Now, Nimrod developed a cult of personality. In fact, he probably is the originator of a cult of personality. And that personality is the personality of martial arts, of hunting, of displaying trophies. It is said that he originated the art of hunting with wild animals. Of course, we've seen people hunt with falcons, where you release a falcon and the falcon will go out and catch another animal. Or the idea of hunting with dogs is well known, but Nimrod hunted with leopards who were trained to go out, kill the prey, and then Nimrod, of course, and his fellow hunters would go over and collect that prey that was killed by the leopard. And in fact, there's good historical record, and some of the pashas of the eastern countries, even into the 20th century, have hunted with leopards in the tradition of Nimrod. Now, he's called a mighty hunter before the Lord, and we have a scriptural reference to that idea in Proverbs 15:11, the same language where it says hell and destruction are before the Lord. And there in Proverbs, JR, this phrase means hell and destruction are opposed to the Lord. And when you read this in the Hebrew, what it means is hell and destruction, or in the case of Nimrod being a mighty hunter before the Lord, it's in the face of the Lord. Or as we would say in the 20th century, he got in the Lord's face.
In your face.
In your face.
You know, the interesting thing is why Nimrod did this. He did not just develop world government and what the Bible calls idolatry as a simple misinterpretation of the facts. God's Bible was written in the stars. It was there for all to see. Begins with Virgo, the virgin who bears the Son of God, and his enemy is the serpent and dragon, which is the same thing, and finally ends up in Leo the lion, 12 constellations later, with Leo the lion jumping on Hydra, the many-headed serpent, and destroying him, and the birds eating his flesh, and the bowls of wrath being poured out upon the serpent. This is written in the stars from the earliest days. Flavius Josephus said that was given to Adam and to Seth and his sons. Nimrod perverted all of this. He's the one who created the worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars as gods, and made himself to be the Savior. This was not a mistake. No. This was not a simple error in judgment. He deliberately, knowing the truth, diabolically changed it for the civilization over which he ruled.
And to continue this story, according to historians, Nimrod was the founder of Old Babylon at the head of the Persian Gulf, there in the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And during the lifetime of Nimrod, the leopard skin became the symbol of the Babylonian priesthood. In fact, if you read The Two Babylons, a very famous book by Alexander Hislop, and JR, I'm looking at a copy right now, pages 44 and 45, we have two, and we'll get this on the screen so you can see it. We have a Babylonian priest in a leopard skin costume, and also, on the opposite page, an Egyptian priest in a leopard costume, and he has the head of the leopard at his waist. Now, what we have here is the establishment of the leopard priesthood in Babylon. But what's more important is that Nimrod founded other cities as well. And I want to read in Genesis 10:10, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Out of that land went forth Asher and builded Nineveh, the city of Rehoboth, Calah, and Rezin. Between Nineveh and Calah, the same as a great city. JR, in simple language, Nimrod built Babel, or Babylon. He went forth and built Nineveh, which was one of 4 great cities that lay about 200 miles to the north of Babylon. In other words, he was the founder of Babylon and Nineveh, 2 wicked cities in the old world, and Josephus has a great deal to say about what he did. Josephus, in Antiquities of the Jews, Book 1, writes about the establishment of Babel in the land of Shinar, and he says this, and I'm quoting, "Now it was Nimrod who excited them," that is the people of these cities, "to such an affront and a contempt of God. He was the grandson of Ham, the son of Noah, a bold man, and of great strength of hand. He persuaded them not to ascribe it to God as if it was through his means that they were happy or blessed, but to believe that it was their own courage which procured that happiness." In other words, Nimrod was the father of those who believe that man blesses himself in his own strength and power.
Now, from this government by Nimrod came the worship of Baal and Ashtoreth. We have the word Baal from the term for the sun god, the sun becoming a god, and Ashtoreth as the female counterpart This actually came from Nimrod and his wife Semiramis, didn't it?
Yes, and it became embodied in the myth of Semiramis and Tammuz, the wife and her husband. Now, in this mythology, generally ascribed to Nimrod, and Nimrod, by the way, met a horrible death, which is undocumented, although Jewish history says that he was sentenced to death. And there is a myth in which his body is cut into many pieces, and the pieces have to be recovered and restored to life. Well, that myth is the foundation of the mother and child dogma.
And all of the pagan religions of the ancient world. We'll be discussing that when we return in just a moment. Semiramis was evidently the wife of Nimrod. When Nimrod was killed, she developed the mother-child goddess of fertility type of pagan religion. And from that has come every pagan religion in the world. Isis of Egypt, Diana of the Ephesians, Minerva, and so on, and Venus, many of the mother goddess. In fact, Europa is also a takeoff from this.
Yes.
In fact, Europa rides a beast. I would have to say that beast is probably a leopard, wouldn't you?
I would say, yeah, Europa is, from whom Europe is named, is really a model of Isis and Osiris, of Ishtar and Tammuz, of Baal and Ashtoreth, and also of the Roman Fortuna and Jupiter, the child. And J.R., this myth of the mother and child is always the myth of a husband and wife. The husband is violently killed, the parts of his body are scattered, there's a time of regathering those parts, and the husband is then resurrected into a child, and then we have the picture of the child in the mother's arms, so that we have the husband-wife-child scenario. And this becomes the seat of goddess worship throughout history and throughout the world. And by the way, as we're going to see, that's only been moderately subverted. That's the ancient mystery religion, which is still lurking in the shadows, waiting to be recovered in the days of Antichrist.
It's a perversion of Virgo who brings forth the Son of God.
Absolutely.
Now, Gary, we have this incredible discussion among ancient historians that Nimrod sought the life of Abraham.
Yes.
And Shem was a little bit upset that the great-grandson of Ham should be after one of his progeny. And so Shem, as I understand it, brought charges up against Nimrod and gathered a group of 70 judges who listened to the evidence and judged Nimrod to be guilty, and they had him executed and cut up into pieces. Is that the way the story goes?
And that's the way the story goes, and supposedly then all the mythology descends from that event. Now, we have in the Bible the story of Noah. And I think we all know the story of, in Genesis 9:20, Noah began to be an husbandman and planted a vineyard. He drank of the wine, was drunken, he was uncovered within his tent. Ham, the father of Caanan, saw the nakedness of his father and told his two brethren without. And we have here the sin of Ham, which becomes, I suppose, institutionalized in a curse. The son of Ham, Caanan, is cursed. Well, Caanan just happens to be the man who came in and appropriated the land of the Bible, the Holy Land. Now, another son of Ham is Cush, and Cush is Nimrod's father. And J.R., it's my contention that in the line of Ham there is a curse that descends all the way through Nimrod, and this is why we have this cult of false religion that comes out of the household of Nimrod.
So Nimrod did not develop idolatry just as a misunderstanding of the ancient truth. He was so close to the fountainhead of truth, he had to deliberately destroy what Noah had told his family. Why did Nimrod deliberately establish the worship of the sun, the moon, and the stars? Because he didn't like the curse placed upon his forefathers.
In
Yes.
fact, quickly here, Josephus writes about that. He says, Josephus, book 1, and paragraph 4, chapter 4, he also gradually changed the government into tyranny, seeing no other way of turning man from the fear to God but to bring them into constant dependence upon his power. He also said he would be revenged on God if he should have a mind to drown the world again. Now there it is in a nutshell, to be revenged on God.
He didn't want God to drown the world again. Now this comes down to the crux of the whole thing here. The Tower of Babel and why it was built. Yeah. Who got the idea for this tower in the first place? 500 years ago, when Al-Mamun entered the Great Pyramid of Giza, he found the floors were encrusted in a ½ inch to an inch of salt. This salt was ocean salt, which simply said that the Great Pyramid of Giza at one time was underwater. Gary, this to me has a simple explanation. Mm-hmm. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built before Noah's flood, which says to me, and the Egyptian Book of the Dead, I've been told, says that Enoch built the Great Pyramid.
Yes.
The sons of Seth, according to Josephus, built some kind of monument which possibly could be the Great Pyramid. There's no other monument that I know of that would survive the Great Flood, as Josephus said it did. So what we have here is the testimony of God, with the Sphinx out in front representing the head of it, representing Virgo the Virgin, and the body of the lion representing Leo the lion, showing where God's ancient religion, his ancient belief system came from. God put the Bible in the stars. He says in the opening chapters of Genesis, he made the stars for signs.
Now here's what's fascinating. Jewish tradition unequivocally blames Nimrod for the rebellion at the Tower of Babel. He was the ringleader. And in that whole system, as we have already seen, is the Babylonian mystery religion, which erupts in the book of Revelation as the harlot riding that leopard beast. So what we have, JR, is a pre-flood worship of demigods that was destroyed. Nimrod desired to reinstitute what he thought was a better world. In other words, we're talking now about the post-flood world. The waters are drying up and everybody's turning to farming and building cities, and Nimrod says, "Oh, for the old days when we used to worship Jupiter or Zeus, yeah, or Baal," as he comes down to us in Babylonianism. Oh, for those days. And he deliberately set out to reestablish that worship of the demigods. In fact, we have this sentence from Josephus. He says, "But as to the plain of Shinar in the country of Babylonia, such of the priests as were saved took the sacred vessels of Jupiter and Ialius and came to Shinar of Babylonia." There is the false worship.
Yes. So the Tower of Babel is actually a takeoff from the Pyramid of Giza.
Right.
It was to be another pyramid.
Yes.
And after, of course, the languages were changed and people began to scatter throughout the world, they went everywhere building these towers of Babel, these pyramids. You find them all over the world.
Absolutely.
And after everybody turned against Nimrod and his government and they left town, the progeny of Nimrod headed right straight for Egypt, where the Great Pyramid was there. They wanted to rebuild or restore that type of culture. And Caanan, of course, knowing that God had promised the land to Abraham, went right straight to the promised land and usurped it to try to keep Abraham away.
Absolutely. And by the way, there's a curse on Caanan that comes down through Ham, and we must remember that the Canaanite civilization placed itself squarely in the middle of two great axes of power, Egypt to the southwest and Nineveh to the northeast. and all the great wars swept back and forth through the Holy Lands. You've got to remember, too, the Babylonian priesthood was the leopard priesthood of Babylon. The Egyptian priesthood was the leopard priesthood of Egypt. J.R., it was one and the same priesthood established by Nimrod.
Mm-hmm. And in whether it be the Mayan civilization of South America and Central America, or the Aztecs, it's still the worship that it was established by Nimrod himself. That's incredible that he had such power and influence over the nations.
It is, and in fact, we're going to find out that this power descends even to us today. This is not a dead religion. The mystery religion lives on, and it's going to reemerge again in the days of Antichrist.
And the Nazis had the symbol of the leopard.
Yes.
And the German tanks today are called leopards. It's a takeoff from the Aryanism of the old Persian Empire that extended from Nimrod. There's more we'll have to tell you about in our next program. We'll be back in just a moment.